Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Sam Kinch. He is the Director of Technical Account Management at Tanium. Sam, it's good to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And our topic today is autonomous endpoint management. This is a new iteration, a new kind of generation of technology in something that agencies have had to do for some time, which is manage endpoints. And we know that endpoint populations are growing as more and more people work remotely on multiple devices. You hear this in agency after agency. And it's also a good example of the way automation is being applied to cybersecurity and technical management. But why don't we start with exactly what AEM is, autonomous endpoint management?
That's a great question. I think it's something that people are quite familiar with, but just don't realize it. And I would say that if I was to describe it simply, it's the same concept that we employ with vehicles these days. And the concept of automating vehicles to the point where we have Tesla autopilot self-driving the car without human intervention from point A to point B, we want to get to that point in the same way with endpoint management, whether it's patching or compliance or even threat response, being able to actually take that whole holistic enterprise and automate it to the point where I don't have to have fewer people, but I can apply those people towards more prioritized business processes rather than the mundane daily, day in and day out tasks.
So that is to say, if something were to attack that device, the user may not even be aware of what it's doing on its own to protect itself or to take itself off the network, which I guess the user would be able to tell at that point.
Right. No, absolutely. I think the automation comes into play where even if something took an endpoint offline where the user didn't realize it, that the automation would submit even a trouble ticket automatically, if you want to call it that, to ServiceNow or some other enterprise solution where there actually is a help desk ticket in the system so that people are aware of what's happened.
All right, and so this is a good example of the bigger picture here, which is automation and to some degree machine learning, even AI-driven automation in service of cybersecurity, network operations, and I guess you'd call it almost continuity of operations, maybe.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The thing here is that I think what we're seeing is a trend from the more simplistic view of what IT operations really entails, the day in, day out patching, the threat response, each bucketed into its own pillar. And what we're seeing is what our Chief Technology Officer, Matt Quinn, likes to term suburban sprawl within the IT industry. So what you're seeing is a massive shift in the amount of data that's being absorbed by businesses as part of their day in and day out business practices. You're seeing a massive uptick in variety of data. So that variety of data adds complexity to how do you deal with it. You see businesses growing, so they're expanding to cloud computers. They're expanding to what we call hyper-converged technologies. And, that's really bringing in everything from software-based or software-defined assets to pushing a lot of stuff into the cloud, to hybrid environments, to kind of merging it all into these massive technology solutions. And on top of that, you have businesses that aren't just these brick and mortar shops anymore, where they're sitting in one location. You have a couple people working remotely from Phoenix. You have a couple people in Spain. You have a couple people in Singapore, and they're all part of the same organization. And so now you have geographically separate, very dispersed organizational entities. How do you manage that thing at scale? Qualys puts out, every year they put out this threat landscape year-in review report. So this 2023 one was pretty interesting. It highlighted the fact that currently 81% of weaponized vulnerabilities hit software, applications, and systems. So that leaves the other 19% roughly in the network space. But if you look at the amount of targeting from a threat actor towards that network, that system and the operations, the endpoint space, if you will, where all the systems and the software lies, that's pretty critical to understanding how that technology is growing, but how the business is growing as well. I think you also have another report that came out from Verizon. Their data breach, I think it was called Investigations Report. They put it out every year, the DIBR. The one quote that often gets misrepresented, but actually comes from their 2020 report, it talked about endpoints, and it said 70% of successful breaches source from the endpoint. So when you combine all that and the growth and the scale, I think what we have is we have businesses that have really grown up very fast and haven't brought their IT infrastructure along with it. I mean, you look back, 10 years ago, your business leadership made decisions. And they made decisions, and then 3 months later, they told the IT shop. We don't have that now. We have fully integrated IT shops where if a business doesn't tell their IT shop, they're losing money. I mean, I think of banking industry, which is fully reliant upon basically the infrastructure that goes along with managing banking and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of concern I think people have when it comes to how fast we're growing and how can we handle that. And I think that's where automation really shines. You bring in automation to help support by reducing the complexity, reducing those mundane tasks, and adding in a effectiveness, right? Reducing the organizational complexity within businesses. Fundamentally, I don't think this is about solving any new problems that are out there. I actually think this is probably solving existing problems, but at great scale. I think that's probably the best way to frame it.
Yeah, so speaking of scale, switching from business to, say, federal agencies, they may not be growing in the sense of hiring hundreds of thousands of more people like some of these companies, but you have scale to begin with. And then you also have changing operational modes. And so it seems like the same application that you just mentioned of automation would apply in a situation like that, where simply the technology change and the mode of work change. And sometimes new programs get launched, which have to be done at scale. We saw that throughout the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Now, Congress is kind of likes the idea of big programs at scale. So the same principles would apply for managing cyber in that context, you would think?
Oh, absolutely. The automation that I'm speaking of, it applies to businesses as a whole, but I look at it from the lens of cybersecurity, of information technology, and I go, this is exactly where we need to be. We need to be capitalizing on what other people have already done with regards to automation and apply it to our IT and our cybersecurity staffs to help that business grow and be successful in the future.
Now, automation has been around for a while, orchestration, whatever you want to call it, but artificial intelligence brings something new to it. And maybe discuss what is going on in AI with respect to cyber. And maybe there's two sides to it. Cyber is enhanced with the use of AI, but then AI itself is something that needs to be cyber protected.
I agree. When you look at what's happening within the last probably 6 months within our government spaces, we have Congress and the White House and people in general concerned about artificial intelligence. Even to the point where in July of last year, the White House put out a 4-page, kind of unique for them, a 4-page document. It wasn't even a report, but it was really a document called Ensuring Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Artificial Intelligence. Just a 4-page document, but they were concerned about it enough to put that out even before they put out their executive order, which came out in October. So I think you have people that are greatly concerned. And I think we should be concerned as well, but I don't think we should be scared. Artificial intelligence is a natural move for us as we move forward with technology. And even though it's new and it's different, I think it's something that we can embrace in a way that actually makes sense. I think it's important to note that automation and artificial intelligence probably aren't exactly the same thing. Artificial intelligence can use automation to accomplish its task, but artificial intelligence is essentially the brain, right? It's the artificial brain applying logic to data points, thousands, if not millions, if not billions of data points at a time to come up with a solution that makes the most sense, and then applying automation to make that thing happen. I like to use an example of vehicles. I think this will resonate really well. When you have vehicles where we started off about 10 years ago, you started seeing an influx of what I would call building blocks of things happening within the vehicle industry. Auto sensing wipers. It starts raining and my wipers come on. They actually spin faster as soon as the rain pours down heavier, and that's nothing, I'm not doing anything, it's just doing it automatically when I turn it on. You have auto braking, you have even auto dimming headlights. So when cars are in front of me, it's going to dim those headlights from high beams to low beams. I think this is what we're seeing is we're seeing the smartness of the automobile industry saying, you know what, we want to get to fully autonomous. But how do we get there? I think it's the building block mentality that's most important here in this situation, where we start seeing taking smaller chunks of what could be a scary topic, breaking it down into something that's palatable and building trust with the populace. If you stick with the car theme, you have Tesla, I mentioned autopilot. They have an artificial intelligence that makes decisions about what to do, but it's automation that actually does it, right? It's automation that actually makes the thing happen. I think to frame it a little bit differently, the question you ask, it's probably better put as in, how do we build trust in a populace that gets us to an autonomous cybersecurity process, right? A flow, a workflow, if you will, within business. I think there's a couple things we can talk about here that highlight, and I've alluded to them a little bit. The first one is really the building block mentality, breaking things down into smaller chunks and giving the user, the practitioner of whatever, cyber defense, IT operations, giving them the ability to manually turn stuff on and off, giving them the ability to tune it to however they want based upon the technology that they want to employ. Maybe they don't want to roll it all out at once, maybe they want to take bits and pieces at a time. But I think there's something here that gets lost, right? You have the tuning part, but think about your Tesla autopilot for a second. If you're driving down the road and it comes up to a stop sign and it wants to make a decision on what to do you want your autopilot making a decision based upon last week's data? I know I probably wouldn't.
Sure not. Yep.
Right? So the one thing I think that gets lost here is the assumption that data is just data. And I would argue that I think that what's important here, and this doesn't just apply to human life when it comes to a vehicle driving. I mean, technology is expensive. Businesses are expensive. Financial industries can collapse because of it. So I think what you have to look at is if you're going to apply automation, if you're going to apply artificial intelligence into any of these industries, you have to incorporate in a common sense approach that says, I need data that's real time, because real time in that sense will be quality data that allows me to make decisions that are informant towards my operations. So.
Right, so let's get back to the example of endpoint management.
Sure.
Where they are mobile, they're moving around. What could artificial intelligence do that simple automation of endpoint management can't do now? And what would be the source of data to power that AI? Would it be the devices themselves, or maybe also user behavior, network traffic?
Mm-hmm. I think from fundamentally, if you want to keep it very 50,000 foot, you have artificial intelligence and you have automation that plays a part in executing. I think the most important thing behind that makes that AI effective is the real-time nature of data. So having data that is not just data that's been days or weeks old. I collected it a couple weeks ago, so it's still valid. Having the data that says, hey, I'm driving down the road, for a car example, I'm driving down the road and I come up to a stop sign and I know that the road's clear ahead, versus what's actually happening if I open my eyes and look at real time. There's construction going on, there's people in the road, I shouldn't probably go straight. That's the type of thing I want to apply to, I think should be applied to information technology. Automating the endpoint management side of the house, and I can give you an example, let's say patching. If you had a patching situation where I wanted to patch endpoints because they're out of date, if you look at the way society is right now from a business perspective, there's thousands of pieces of software on those endpoints. And those endpoints really, they're not self-updating a lot of times. They require human intervention because we haven't automated those processes. We're concerned that if I roll a patch out, I'm going to break something. So I need to have a human there just to check it. Well, where AI and automation would come in, if I had real-time data, I would know exactly what endpoints I would have to update. I could roll it through a patch update cycle through test rings. So test beds, maybe it's a dozen devices, and then 100 devices, and then the rest of the enterprise. But each time the automation, not the human, but the automation, the AI, is pushing the patches out, checking to see if the patch is applied successfully, monitoring the CPU, maybe in the memory of the system, to say, is there any issues going on? Did the patch apply successfully? And if so, then they can move forward with each cycle until they get to the enterprise.
So the source of the data then becomes very important.
Absolutely.
All right, and well, suppose someone wants to do this. This is all good theory. I've got a network. I've got 10,000, or in case of some of the big agencies, 100 or 200,000 users,
or millions.
maybe 500,000 endpoints, or millions of endpoints. What is a good strategy for moving from the way I'm doing it now, augmenting my IT staff with artificial intelligence and ensuring I know what data I need to pull such that I can take advantage of the algorithms that will automate some of the things you mentioned, like patching or generation of trouble tickets or whatever?
I think a good, let's stick with the car analogy because I think it's easy enough to stick with, and it actually resonates, I think will resonate really well. Let's look at how the manufacturing industry, the vehicle industry, handled their automobiles. Years ago, you started seeing small bits and pieces of automation becoming part of everyday vehicles. I can get into any vehicle now and turn on lights, but most of the vehicles now also have the auto dimming headlights, right? I have auto braking that's being applied where if I'm coming up to a car at a rapid speed and my vehicle senses I'm not stopping and I'm going to stop in enough time, it's going to apply the brakes for me. So you start seeing building blocks being applied. I think that's the earlier on. They're recommendations, they're things that could be turned off by the individual, and I think that's important. It's manual control, building trust, allowing the user to define what circumstances they want to apply things in. We then saw a growth into parking assist, where I pull up to a parking spot and now I can have the vehicle park for me. How about lane drift? I'm driving down the road and all of a sudden something happens where I'm dazing off and I miss the fact that I'm drifting off the side and the car brings me back into the lane. Adaptive cruise control, doing the adjustment back and forth where it's controlling via radar. These are all things that are just packages building on each other to the point where I get to fully autonomous. I think we do the same thing with cybersecurity. We build from recommendations that are fully flexible to partial autonomous to fully autonomous. And we do that in a building block that we build on trust, and therefore people will come along with us. And I think believe in that at that point.
Yeah, and sticking with that road analogy, there are times when you want to drift into the other lane. Say if there's a dead deer in the right-hand wheel track of where you're going, the system could sense that and purposely cross lanes halfway just for that momentary period. And that's when you really get something that's smarter, that augments what people would do, but usually they're not fast enough to do it.
Exactly. I think that's a good vehicle example. I think if you looked at cybersecurity or information technology, you could apply it to, let's say, an incident response. Cyber defenders, a lot of them will look at signals that they're getting from their endpoints going, what's going on with my endpoints? Is something wrong? Is something compromised? Let's assume for a second that a defender receives a signal that says, hey, somebody just executed Mimikatz. Mimikatz is a common tool for nefarious hackers to gain access to what they call a password hash. It's a way for me to pretend to be somebody else by passing their hash on to another computer and pretending to be them by logging in. Mimikatz isn't commonly used for cyber defense, and so the use of it would trigger a signal. In my recommendation would be that it trigger a signal. So automation would play a part here. I have artificial intelligence and automation looking at it going, hey, Mimikatz isn't normal. It shouldn't have fired. Let me say with about a 90-95% chance that it is nefarious activity, I'm going to, by chance, kill the process, not by chance, but by automation, kill the process, and then have artificial intelligence say, okay, what's the logic here? It's a normal user. It looks nefarious. It's coming from an IP outside of the normal business enterprise. Well, I'm also going to apply a quarantine rule to that. I'm going to quarantine an endpoint. So within seconds, you've already deduced down that you need to isolate that endpoint, and you have no human in the loop. I think that's what we're trying to get to. But those are all building blocks. It's not a fully autonomous system yet. I just happen as a IT professional to say, if you see Mimikatz, kill the process. If you see Mimikatz, quarantine the endpoint. I think that what this does is it breaks down that jump all in mentality that we have to go fully autonomous right now. It kind of gets around that, hey, I have fear, but it's okay. I can start with the small things and then build on it.
And as phishing and new kinds of mobile device attacks, such as phony texts and so on, become the ever-increasing source of hacks and break-ins, this becomes really important then, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the autonomous nature or the artificial intelligence approach is required, I think, going forward. We talked about at the beginning the growth of businesses, the growth of the number of complex environments that we're working with, even the types of systems where you're dealing with enterprises that everything is automated. Everything has an IP address, your fridges, your phones, everything. So I think that in order to build, in order to grow at scale, and to actually remediate or even do any technology type work at scale, we're going to have autonomous endpoint management in the end.
All right, on that note, I'd like to thank you for being with us. My guest today has been Sam Kinch, the Director of Technical Account Management at Tanium. I'm Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the industry exchange, cyber.